Thank you very much, Ciarán Corla. At the outset of wrapping up this debate, I would like to thank all of the deputies from every side of the House who contributed to, I think, what was a very good debate over the last 2 nights. There were some very strong contributions from across all sides in this House, and I think an acknowledgement of the vital role that credit unions are playing right throughout the country. There's clearly a lot of goodwill towards credit unions, but Ciarán Corla, goodwill is no longer good enough. We need far more than that. We need practical and tangible action by government and by the regulator to support the credit union movement. And listening to Minister Noonan last night, as I did very carefully, I have to say I was deeply disappointed with the clear lack of understanding of the challenges facing the credit union movement at this time. He is either in complete denial about what is going on, or else he simply is not aware of it whatsoever. No acknowledgement of the really serious issues that the credit union movement is facing at this time. And if the Minister and the Government honestly believe that there are not serious challenges, that there are not serious problems, then why do they think that over the last 2 evenings all of the main leaders of the credit union movement in this country have given up their time to come into National Parliament and to listen to this debate? They didn't come for a night out, Minister. They came because they are worried. They came because they are really concerned about what is happening to the credit union movement, and they came because they care. And they came as a cry out for help to save a great movement, one of Ireland's greatest national movements. And the starting point, Minister, is to accept that there is a problem. And if the government doesn't accept that there is a problem, then really we are going nowhere. Last night the Minister spoke a lot about the Commission on credit unions. The Commission on Credit Unions was largely focused on the regulatory structure. And yes, it did call for a strengthened regulatory structure, and we all support that. No issue whatsoever with that. But their central recommendation on the regulatory structure, Minister, was credit unions should not be regulated on a one-size-fits-all basis. Rather, a tiered regulatory approach should be adopted. That has not happened, Minister. And that was the central recommendation of the Commission in respect of the regulatory structure. The Registrar proposed a tiered system in Consultation Paper 76. That was not consistent with the view or the spirit of the Commission on Credit Unions. The Commission strongly recommended a system that would be reflective of the nature, scale and complexity of credit unions. Such a system would enable small credit unions to successfully continue to offer basic services with a lower regulatory demand on them, while also enabling other credit unions who wish to expand their range of services for members, put the necessary framework in place to get on with it. And that's very, very explicit in the report of the Commission, and that simply has not happened. The reality is, Minister, the key issue in terms of regulation is the approach that is being taken. And the spin from some of the government TDs that we're trying to advocate lax regulation for credit unions is simply not the case. The regulation of credit unions must be proportionate. Instead, what we have at the present time is regulation that is stifling, regulation that is overly bureaucratic, regulation that is heavy-handed, and regulation that is not based on the basic principle of fairness, and regulation where communication is very poor indeed. The entire regulatory structure that was put in place, Minister, a number of years ago was based on the assumption that there were massive problems in credit unions throughout the country. The figure of €500 million to €1 billion has been cited in the debate a number of times. That has not transpired. Those massive problems have not transpired. Yes, there have been individual problems in credit unions, and those have been resolved at some cost, but very minimal cost in the overall context, Minister. And I think that has to be acknowledged, that the structure which was put in place was based on that fundamentally false assumption that credit unions were in deep, deep trouble in terms of their underlying financial health. That has not proven to be the case. Credit unions have invested, Minister, in compliance, in improving their governance arrangements, in improving their internal controls, and that structure now must be funded. That structure comes with additional cost. And the reality is that credit unions now need to be allowed to compete. They need to be given the tools to allow them to compete in the Ireland of 2015. and to justify the costs involved in complying with that regulatory structure. New business opportunities, new products, new services are not being sanctioned. Not a single new product or service has been sanctioned by the registrar over the last number of years to credit unions. Credit unions must be allowed to lend sensibly. Of course, Minister, it has to be prudent lending, but the restrictions currently in place are simply ridiculous. And last night, Minister Noonan made great play of the fact that credit unions can now apply for a review of their lending restrictions. That process, Minister, is extremely onerous, extremely expensive, will involve a huge amount of work by the internal auditors of the credit unions. And I asked the fundamental question, why do they have to apply? The registrar of credit unions has been crawling all over the credit unions in Ireland for the last number of years. There have been on-site inspections, they have been through the books upside down and inside out, and yet they are putting the credit unions to the trouble, the hassle, the expense of making a formal application to review their lending restrictions. That should be done as part of the normal regulation of credit unions. And Minister, you should be taking that point up with them. Minister Noonan last night referred to the Credit Union Advisory Committee. He didn't refer to the fact that it's a statutory committee, which has to be established in law. He equally didn't refer to the fact that there's no representative of the credit union movement on the advisory committee. Minister, that's a joke. That should be amended immediately. The fact that the terms of reference of that advisory committee are so narrow, Minister. It's not looking at the overall business model, the need to modernise the structure, the appropriateness of the regulation that credit unions are facing. It's not looking at those fundamental issues. Why have some credit unions not been allowed to hold AGMs for 4 years? I mean, if the issues in credit unions are so serious, then based on the level of work that the registrar has done to date, they should come out and say it. Why are credit unions being left in the dark? And as I said last night, the healthy credit unions are not being told that they're healthy and they should continue to do what they're doing. And the credit unions with problems are equally not being told what their problems are and how they need to fix them. And that is not acceptable. And bad and all as the situation is, Minister, it's about to get a whole lot worse. And neither Minister Noonan nor yourself refer to consultation paper 88 and the measures that are proposed in it. And I understand that the registrar and indeed the Minister is about to sign off on those. And Minister, those will have very profound implications. Not least, as one example, the proposal to cap at €100,000 the amount of savings that a credit union member will hold. That will affect 55% of credit unions, according to CP 88. Yes, only a small number of members, but over half of credit unions. And Minister, what signal does it send out? A very negative, toxic signal that there is no confidence by the registrar and the government in credit unions, that we will only allow credit unions to hold a level of savings that is underpinned by the deposit guarantee scheme. That will do enormous damage to the credit union movement, Minister. Minister, if you and the government want to really help credit unions, you should press the pause button right now. CP 88 should not be signed off, and you should initiate immediately a working group involving representatives of the industry to examine the appropriateness of the regulatory structure at this time. Yes, I'm in favour of bringing it to the Finance Committee, but not after the horse has bolted, Minister. If these measures are signed into law by the Minister for Finance, we are heading for deep, deep trouble. And the fundamental question is, Ceann Comhairle, does this government want to be the government that presides over the gradual demise of our credit union? I'm sure you don't. Well, Minister, let this be a watershed moment. Let this be the turning point. And if this motion is to achieve anything, then at least let it be that the credit union movement, the future of credit unions, are now firmly on the political agenda. Have a fresh look at the whole thing, Minister. The current approach is not working. Changes need to be made, and made fast. I commend the motion to the House. Ceann Comhairle.
Thank you.